So, welcome, folks, to another podcast series on building high performance teams. Today, I'm delighted to welcome the CTO and co founder of Workvivo, Joe Lennon. Joe, welcome. Great to see you.
Thanks, Darragh. Delighted to be on the show, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Brilliant, Joe. I'm going to jump straight in, and I guess the first thing I'd love to learn from you is maybe a little bit more about yourself professionally, and something about yourself personally too. Anything that you'd like to share, just so that the viewers can know you a little bit better.
Yeah, sure, Darragh. So, yeah, in terms of about me, right? So, I'm Joe Lennon. I'm the Chief Technology Officer, co-founder of Workvivo. I'm a self-confessed utter geek and nerd. I'm a techie through and through, have been since I was a kid. And yeah, like my background really is in software engineering, software development. I'm a coder at heart, still coding today, even though I probably shouldn't be. And I know my team are just itching to get me to stop, so that I stop creating problems for them to fix later on. But yeah, it's, I'm a tech guy, just doing what I love. And, I'm one of those lucky people who, when people ask me what I like to do outside of work, it's, well, actually, I kind of like what I do for work. So it's, it doesn't feel like work when you love what you do, right? So, like a bit about my background, like growing up, I was like, as I mentioned, I was always obsessed with computers and technology and video games and all of that kind of thing. And my parents would have actively encouraged that interest from a very young age. Ensuring that we always, even though my parents wouldn't have had a lot of money when we were growing up, there was always like, I had a Super Nintendo when, not everybody had a Super Nintendo, and I had a computer available to me, and I was able to learn the hard way, like how you break things when you do something on a computer. And then, my dad would routinely tell me, hey, you broke it, it's up to you to fix it, man. So that was kind of like how I got into tech very early on. And then, through my teens, like even at school, I think, I suppose I always kind of had a bit of an interest in business and starting a company and all that kind of thing. And, I would have started my very first business, which didn't go very far now, to be fair, but when I was about 14 or 15, doing websites for people when nobody was doing websites. And, my biggest challenge really was going to talk to a business and trying to tell them what a website was, because, back in the 90s, not everybody, really understood firstly what it was, and secondly why in the name of God they'd want one, right? So so that was that was kind of the teenage years, and I think it was probably inevitable that I was going to go on and study something related to technology, and I went on to study business information systems in University College Cork. Fantastic degree program. I'm still very close to a lot of the people involved in that department in UCC, and I know it's obviously changed quite a bit in recent years, but still a lot of admiration for everything that they do up there. And since leaving, I've gone on to hire a lot of people who've walked that same path as well, right? So after I left UCC, my first job was with a company called Core HR. So I joined there back in 2007 as a graduate software engineer, essentially, right? So again, that coding was what I started with, and really took that through my whole career. While I was at Core, I would have taken different roles in the business, including product manager. I would have been, I suppose, the person behind the company's first mobile products, and doing everything from building that product from the ground up to selling it to supporting it and everything else, right? So it gave me a lot of experience in how to build and release and sell software products, right? So that was really great. And then I did leave Core back in 2014. Really, I loved my time at Core. I was there for the best part of 7 years, and really enjoyed it, was doing really well, had gone on to take on a leadership role in technology at the company. But I always knew kind of at the back of my head, look, I'm going to want to do something myself at some point. And I always felt that I'd need to gain experience somewhere else before I maybe made the leap and actually did something, you know, on my own. So I jumped out of core in 2014, joined a publishing technology startup called Versa. So I joined them as their CTO. And that was an amazing, you know, I only stayed for about a year full time, but it was an amazing learning experience. To go there and, you know, be part of an executive management team, you know, be involved in reporting to a board of directors, raising investment, building new products, releasing them, selling them, everything again, right? But the one thing you see when you're in a startup is like everything just moves at about like 15 times the pace of a regular kind of established business, right? So, so I would have planned on staying at Versa for a long time, and you know, ultimately, you know, I kind of had an idea one day when I was working there, and it just felt it was time for me to go and do my own thing, which I did, and that led to the development of a company called Subwoofer, which was my first you know, foray into the world of startups from the very start, which was, again, look, I mean, long story short, it didn't work out. I naively was trying to save the music business despite having no experience in the music industry myself. I often joke that like, I love music. I've always loved music, but I can't play an instrument at all. Like, I've tried, I'm not good. I can't sing to save my life. And I even dabbled with music production because I was like, hey, that's a little bit closer to computers, so maybe I'll be good at that. Yeah. But no, absolutely horrendous at it. So yeah, I kind of woke up one morning, I was like, you know what, I'm going to get into music, and I'm going to get into it with code. And that's what I'm going to do. But yeah, no, look, I mean, it was actually an amazing experience. Like, for the 14 or 15 months that we existed, you know, we had monumental highs and absolutely horrendous lows over the course of that time period, but it was a huge learning experience. And like, obviously I learned a lot about business and, you know, starting a company and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, which is great. But I actually think the thing that I learned the most was what I learned about myself. I learned, you know, what I was good at, what I wasn't good at. I learned what I love doing. I love what I hate doing. And that really kind of gave me a lot of, I suppose, information that was very useful then when it came to time to potentially go on and do something else. Yeah. And then that kind of takes us to the start of the Workvivo journey. So yeah, that's kind of my background. In terms of like personally, Darragh, I mean, as I said, look, I mean, you know, people ask about interests and all of that kind of thing, and genuinely, like, technology is my biggest passion and interest. But like, in my personal life, I'm, you know, fortunate enough to be very happily married to my wife Jill, who, you know, I've been with Jill since I was like 15 years old. So we've been together, like, you know, 20 years in January, which is incredible. And yeah, I've 3 kids, Lily, Jamie, and Anna, who obviously we adore. And yeah, so as I said to someone recently, it's, you know, how would I squeeze in any interests outside of having a startup and having 3 young children? I'm not sure. So, but yeah, that's I suppose that kind of brings me to where I am today.
Oh, fantastic. And I think it's fascinating to hear backgrounds like that and how you kind of developed to where you are today with Workvivo, which, you know, despite being a relatively young company, is already hugely successful. I mean, I've been watching them closely online. And, you know, Joe, it's interesting as well. I'm listening to how you kind of went through core. You took on that, what sounded like one of your first kind of large, bigger leadership roles, taking on that technology piece, that technology team piece. And then, of course, going to Subwoofer and starting your own company, which is sounded like an incredible journey and an incredible learning experience, and another very strong leadership type role as well. And of course, now you're CTO with a company that's just on a kind of a rocket ship trajectory. Can you tell me a little bit about what it means to you to take on those leadership roles, to be a leader?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's firstly, it's, you know, it's a great privilege and you know, a massive honor to take on that kind of a role, right? And I think, you know, I was kind of first would have experienced that in the core HR days, where, you know, I would have seen what it was like to, join the company as a graduate and, kind of work in different roles and then move into a leadership role, which I think just gives you a lot of perspective in terms of what it's like to report into a leader and so on. I was also lucky enough to work with, some really good leaders early on in my career as well. So my co-founder at Workvivo, John Goulding, is a great example of that. Myself and John would have joined Core HR like pretty much around the same time, but John would have been joining as their chief operating officer back then. So myself and John would have always had a very strong working relationship. I've always had a lot of admiration for his leadership style and his approach. And also at Core, like somebody who I probably worked closer with than anybody was Mike Murphy, who massively influences my leadership style even today in terms of his approach, which is very, very much a people-driven approach in terms of recognizing that people are like at their most basic level genuinely good and want and hardworking and want to do a good job and want to achieve great things, and by like basically giving people an environment which they can succeed in and ensuring, and like that's your job as a leader, is to create an environment that allows people to succeed. And then really just getting out of their way and letting them do their job effectively. Like that's about it, right? I mean, obviously there's a lot of other things that go on a day-to-day basis, but at a very high level, that's what it's all about. And I think, like again, probably lucky that I'm working in a space like technology and so on, where I get to work with like really intelligent people, some of the smartest people I've ever met, and really it's just about trust. I mean, you trust that people will get the job done and do good work, and then your job becomes very easy. So I think like the other side of it, I guess, is like sometimes there can be some big challenges with it. Like the subwoofer story is probably a great example of that, where look, as I mentioned, it didn't work out, right? And I mean, obviously we were a much smaller team than we've assembled at Workvivo so far, but we still have, there was 5 people in the business when it came time to decide to stop going. And these are people who had like put their faith in me and my idea and my vision, and ultimately that didn't work out. And that's when like it's firstly, obviously there's like some very difficult conversations to tell people, look, yeah, we're going to run out of money. I was never the type of person that would like allow the company to kind of keep going and limping on, and asking people not like to go without pay and stuff like that. So when it was clear that it wasn't going to work out, we just ended it at that point, so that people could go on and they could move on with their lives and their careers and go and find something new. So I think that for me was, I think I never wanted to experience that again. Like I never wanted to get to a point where we just wouldn't have the capability to like keep going and keep ensuring people were continuing to get paid and so on. So I think that's had a pretty significant impact in terms of how I approach like the whole startup in general, right? And we very much kind of took that into Workvivo, with trying to build a sustainable business right from the very start, that didn't require at least initially external funding just even to get off the ground, for example. So I'll stop there, Darragh, because I've probably gone off on a bit of a tangent.
No, I think that's I really liked your answer there. I mean, what really jumped out at me there is, and I've heard this said in different ways from different leaders about allowing people to be kind of self-directed and allowing them to do showing creating an environment where they can really perform, where they can be at their best, and then leaving them do that job. And I think it's really interesting as well that you've had some, quite early on in your kind of leadership career, you've had some kind of really strong experiences and tough experiences in terms of subwoofer, where you had to make the decision to close things down and have those tough conversations, which, as you've said, it's kind of helped you develop as a leader to where you are today, and even in how you engage as CTO and co-founder of Workvivo. Can I ask you, Joe, in terms of like building the teams, like if we're looking at Workvivo today, for example, when you look at building the team and trying to implement that kind of high performance, what kind of characteristics are you trying to, what characteristics are you looking for and trying to implement with the team today?
Oh, it's a great question, Darragh. I think again, it kind of comes back to, like, I suppose what I've just been talking about, and I suppose it's worth pointing out that, you know, that concept of like leaving people be completely autonomous and self-directed, it's not for everybody. So, you know, I think within the context of a newer business and a startup environment, the pace of change and the pace that you're operating at almost mandates that, you know, you need to be able to work that way. So I think, you know, from my perspective, you know, when we're looking to expand the team and looking to bring people on, like, one of the first things that I will do is I'll give people obviously all the good things that are happening with Workvivo. You know, our stories, you know, it's a good story, right? Everybody seems to recognize that things are going in a good direction for us, and, you know, obviously that's really good, and we're very, you know, proud of that, and are happy to share that story with potential new starters. But equally, you know, I present the challenges of working in a startup environment to people. Like, I make it pretty clear that, look, you know, it's very fast paced. It's, you know, you're not going to be handheld through everything. You know, so if you're looking for somebody to give you a list of tasks that you need to do on a daily basis, like, this isn't the job for you, right? It's, you know, we need people who will kind of be given a general sense of direction and, you know, expected to go and find their way from that, right? And, like, that can be very challenging and it can be very difficult. But the other thing is, like, when we look to bring people into the organization, like, we're very selective in terms of who we bring in. And I think the reason that we are is because, well, firstly, we can afford to be, right? We're still small enough that we can afford to be quite selective. But secondly, the environment that we've created here is genuinely one where, you know, I think everybody in the business would say that, you know, everybody here is a great person, somebody that they really get along with, they have fun with, they enjoy working with. And for me, like, that's incredibly important. If you don't have that, and if you have, you know, any kind of animosity or, like, even negativity, you know, and like, one of the things I say about Workvivo as a product and as a platform that we put a lot of focus onto is that we try to create a sense of positivity in the companies that use our product through our solution. And for us, like, in order for us to be able to do that, like, it's really important that our own business is, you know, very positive in its nature, and we're always thinking very positively. So yeah, when it comes to characteristics of, you know, like, great people, for me, it really is, like, about the fit for like where we are in our journey. And as I said, it's the ability to be self-directed and to take your own initiative and so on. And, you know, people who are just naturally very positive and have a very positive outlook on things. I find people who are naturally positive, like, it's kind of infectious, right? It's like, if it's probably a funny thing to say these days, but it's
infectious.
yeah, it's good. It's a good thing, right? It's you know, you find that you soak it up from them, and you come out of meetings and you feel better about yourself than you did going in, which is like, you know, when you have the opposite of that effect, right? And it's somebody who's maybe a little bit more negative, or, you know, finds it difficult to, you know, see the wood through the tree sometimes. Sometimes you can come out of meetings, like, you know, with that person where, you know, you feel a bit more down than you did going in. And I think, you know, when you're like trying to operate at 1,000 miles an hour, like you are in a startup, you need to be positive all the time if you can, to try and keep that momentum, you know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective there, and really interesting insight. And, you know, one of the things that has struck me, and you mentioned it there as well, is the important, when you're building that kind of high performance team, when you're building your team out, you start at the beginning and making sure you're bringing the right people on board. You know, it seems to be rule number one from what I can see across the board. Can I? What have been kind of the biggest challenges that you've come across, Joe? Not necessarily only in Workvivo, but in your career, when you're trying to kind of build that team and get that high performance. What have been the biggest hurdles for you to overcome?
I think obviously there's many challenges with building any team, right? And I think when it comes to especially in a startup environment and a business where, you know, you don't have a lot of people in the organization.
Yeah.
Really, you know, what you need are people who can play dozens of roles, right? So, you
Yeah.
know, you might hire them for a specific role, but ultimately they'll probably come into the business and they could be doing anything on any
Yeah.
given day, right? So I remember when we hired our first employees, so Clara Walsh and Kieran Holland, when they first joined the company, I remember like talking to them and saying, yeah, it's like it's really interesting because like one day, you know, you're talking to a prospective customer about a, you know, potential deal, and then the next day you're, you know, putting out the wheelie bin,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like it's and everything in between, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely for me, like the challenges like that you can kind of come across are, you know, trying to just adapt all the time, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
like how do you adapt to like varying needs and varying pace and so on, where and it is so it's so volatile, right? It's, you know,
Yeah.
you can have any set of new challenges on any given day.
Yeah.
But like what we found, I mean, in like the team that we have here is that I think people like love that. You know,
Yeah.
like people love the challenge of an environment where, you know, they come in on a Monday and like, you know, they face some challenges, and then they come in on a Tuesday and it's like working a completely different job. It's like, you know, you know, you're starting at zero all over again, and
Yeah.
it's exciting, and I think, you know, people love the kind of the learning aspect of that.
Yeah.
Like some challenges that I would say, you know, like that we would have faced, and probably we're facing right now is the challenges associated with, you know, trying to get out of startup mode a little bit.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think you're like, there's a difference between trying to start a company and trying to scale a company, right? And I think we're one of the fortunate few who like get to the second stage, right, which is the scaling up stage.
Yeah.
You know, it's very hard to even just get off the ground, and we're fortunate enough to be in that next step. But there's a lot of challenges around that as well.
Yeah.
You know, like we've plans this year to go from, you know, 35 people to probably over, you know, 70 people, right? So,
Wow.
and that's a
Wow.
very different type of company. Yeah, and you
Yeah.
know, trying to preserve the things that have been working for you have um, that have ultimately, you know, brought the success that you've had to date. So things like speed of execution, things like, you know, phenomenal customer service and experience,
Yeah.
things like, you know, massively like being massively responsive. So if a prospective new customer is on the horizon, moving mountains to make sure you win them,
Yeah.
obviously you want to keep doing all of that, but when you grow as a business, often it becomes more difficult to keep doing that because
Yes.
you face the challenges of scale. You've got to do this for more customers now than you've ever had done before, and obviously, you know, you need to bring more people into the business in order to be able to support that. But bringing more people into the business introduces challenges of its own. It's,
Yeah.
you know, it challenges your culture, it challenges your approach, your process. I mean, you know, we've been, you know, up until relatively recently, we've been extremely process light here in terms of, you know, not letting process get in the way of execution.
Yeah.
But when you get to a certain size, you can't live without some level of process anymore. So it's about trying to introduce that in
Yeah.
such a way that it doesn't like negate all of the great things that you're being capable of from day one,
Yeah.
just because of the fact that you have grown. So yeah, I would say that's probably like one of the greatest challenges. I think, you know, like any kind of operational day-to-day challenges are, you know, they can seem quite big at the time, but you kind of move on and but this is one of those ones where it's important, like it's vital we get this part right. And
Yeah.
you know, if you don't get it right, then, you know, it can be a very expensive mistake, and ultimately, you know, in this world, expensive mistakes, you know, are very costly, right? So
Yeah.
so yeah, but look, we're massively optimistic. I mean, as I said, we've got a phenomenal foundation. You know, we are building from that. Like even some of the people who are joined the company, even in the past few days, like we had 5 people join the business on Monday.
Whoa.
Um,
Whoa.
you know,
Super.
some really talented people and who are adding value already, even though their foot is only barely in the door, right? So
Yeah.
so yeah, massively optimistic about the future for us.
Yeah, and I can feel your optimism and your energy from here, Joe. That's just absolutely flows out of you. That's the your point about moving from startup to scale. For me, that's something new that I haven't really considered before. It's a really really interesting insight in how you're changing operations and want to maintain that same like fantastic culture that you have today and growing it as the business grows.
And actually, just on that, Darragh, like one of the things I think, as a founder, that's actually very difficult to do is like when you start a company, like you inevitably end up doing like most things yourself at some point. So from, as I said, like writing code to building product to designing things, like I designed our first logo for example, even though I can't design really, like I'm definitely not a creative graphic designer or anything like that, right? But I still designed our first logo because look, we needed a logo. So
I
like
like
you
your
go
logo, by
from,
the way. I think your logo I
well,
was
the new one's a
admiring
lot
it.
better, in fairness. So we're lucky enough now to have some really, really talented
Yeah,
creative people within the company. So our branding is like top notch now. But
excellent.
yeah, the first one it did us well for a while. But no, you go from basically being involved in everything,
Yeah,
and sometimes trying to like take a step back and actually not get stuck into everything can be
yeah,
challenging in itself. And
yeah,
I think it's often because you've become so accustomed to like just diving in and getting stuck into things that you feel kind of like almost this like magnet of being drawn back into it. But I suppose the challenge with it, right, is that you can go and do that, and in some cases I still do, but it's at a cost. And
yeah,
oftentimes the cost is not thinking about strategic things that will help us grow.
yeah,
It's solving a problem that's in the now versus in the future. So getting that mentality shift from being a founder of a startup with a tiny team. So you call yourself a CTO or a CEO, but really you're just you know doing everything, right?
yeah,
So it's like trying to go from that into actually like playing the role of an exec can be
yeah.
can be a challenge in itself. But what I'm hopefully getting a little bit better at every day, Darragh. So we'll see how I get on.
It's based on what you were saying about your coders saying, please stop coding, that they'll be happy to see you make that transition. Joe, I guess one of the things I've been dying to ask you, because especially where Workvivo is today, is around kind of remote working. Like we've been thrust into the remote work area. Like we've always had remote work, but like nothing quite like we have today. And I'd just like to have you seen kind of changes in how you lead and how you kind of build those high performance teams? Have you seen kind of, are there fundamental changes, or do you think it's an adaptation of what we've had already?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that it's a major change. I think for most organizations, ourselves included. I mean, before the onset of the pandemic, we had a lot of people in the same office in Douglas and Cork, and we did have people working in Dublin and in the US and so on. But the vast majority of our workforce were in the same office, and we were, I suppose, used to collaborating in a very physical way. Even though we build a product that enables organizations to communicate with each other virtually and digitally, we were still very much operating that way. But
Yeah,
with that said, I think for us, like specifically, I mean, we found very quickly that we were able to adapt to the remote and in fact embrace it. And I mean,
yeah,
now we're a remote first organization, and that's not just because we have to be. It's because we've just it's been an obvious decision for us. I mean, it's been
yeah,
a massive enabler that we can hire people regardless of where they're located. People who are happy to work from home, can do so. And I think the world has been moving that way very slowly over a very sustained period of time. I think
yeah,
you've worked in multinationals yourself, Darragh, right? So you're familiar with in multinationals the work from home culture has been there for a long time, and people often doing a little bit of a mix and getting a balance there.
yeah,
So I think that's been kind of coming, but I think obviously a lot of organizations have found themselves like as you said, thrust or like catapulted essentially into this
Yeah.
against their will in some cases. But I mean, like we've done surveys and things like that of people to see, how people are finding the reality of working from home and working remotely. And like I think like there is definitely a trend that people are mostly happy about it and enjoying the flexibility and freedom that it offers. And the majority of people seem to want like some level of a hybrid situation when they return. And I think you only have to look at any of the major tech companies in terms of how they're configuring themselves now for when they expect offices to be an option for people again by the end of next year, hopefully. They're configuring themselves to like basically give people a choice, right? And it's up to people themselves to decide, do you want to work in an office environment or do you want to work from home or do you want to mix of both? And for us, I mean, like we're setting ourselves up essentially where our office in Douglas now, like we wouldn't be able to fit everybody in our office, right? So even if we wanted to, we couldn't bring everybody back to the office. But we're setting ourselves up for, a kind of a hot desking arrangement where, people can basically elect, I'm going to go and work from the office today, and I book it in and so on and work at a desk. And we've, set the place up really well so that people can, dock in, do their work and then dock out. And obviously, there's been additional challenges around all of the requirements for cleaning and sanitization and all that kind of thing. But in terms of like remote like work, I think, we definitely, like myself and John would have seen, remote work being the future for many years. I think really all that's happened is it's been massively accelerated by COVID. And it's funny because like when we actually look at like the market for a product like Workvivo, it's been kind of interesting to see, like back in March or April, there was like this absolute massive rush where we saw like huge amounts of interest from companies who were scrambling to try and find tools, right? So they were looking for, we have to go remote in the morning, especially some like organizations who maybe wouldn't be cloud native, where they wouldn't have, all their tools in the cloud already, and they're kind of a lot of on-premise solutions and so on. For them, it was a real scramble trying to find solutions for various problems. And in many cases, they didn't even know what problems they had. They just knew they'd need stuff in order to be able to communicate effectively. But what's been really interesting for us has been like what we've seen is companies have kind of I think most companies at this point have, like they basically sorted out the real basic operational like concerns that they would have had. So things like being able to, have a video call on something like Zoom, or being able to chat with somebody in real time on a platform like, Microsoft Teams or Slack or something like that. Like those are solved problems for most companies now. But what we're really seeing at the moment is a huge drive towards what we would call internally the kind of the higher order need, right? So, and that is how do these companies that have, been kind of figuring it out as they go along on remote over the last 6 months, how do they like continue to like drive a really positive culture in their organization when they are 100% remote and they're not necessarily set up to be that way, right? So and we found definitely that organizations are really looking for a technology solution that helps them with the challenge of shaping and ensuring protecting their culture in a digital world. And that's where tools like Workvivo really do shine.
That's and and we've started to the next question I was going to ask is around the kind of digital tools that you see are critical for today and how you see them emerging. I had kind of really interesting conversation with a customer recently, and they were talking about they're using all this technology, but they're still trying to figure out how to make the kind of water cooler conversations work. Those conversations that happen as you're kind of passing someone in the corridor and things like that. Are there, and it's, and I'm familiar with Workvivo, and I've seen one of your early demos probably a couple of years ago now at this stage, and I think it's a wonderful tool. I think it's totally intuitive. You can just pick it up and use it straight away. Are you still looking to develop that further so that kind of cultural in-house on-site experience can happen through a digital means?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like at the end of the day, I think the solution for companies when it comes to tools and technology, it's not a single tool or piece of technology that they need in order to be able to deliver an effective solution to everyone, right? So, but like what we're trying to do is essentially cement our position as being, one of the most important tools for an organization in terms of the bigger picture message that needs to get out and needs to touch as much of the organization as it possibly can. So like what tools, like, I mean, we're big users internally of Zoom and of Slack, and what those tools are really great for is in the moment communication. So when you need to talk to somebody, you need to talk to them right now. When you need to have a conversation with a small number of people, in a meeting context or in a chat context, those tools are phenomenal, right? And it's, as I said, it's a solved problem. They're doing that really, really well. And as I said, we're using those tools ourselves. But what I think a lot of organizations are still struggling with is that kind of bigger picture message. So what about sharing all of the good things that are happening across the organization with as much of the organization as is possible, right? And I think that traditionally we've used things like emails, like where you email a group to say thanks for the hard work, and look, most people never see it because it gets lost in the ether of email, and then you lose kind of the reaction side of things as well, because people tend to look at it and see an email like that, and then that's it, right? It's lost in time. Whereas the great things about a platform like Workvivo is that message. Obviously the message itself is really important, but often it's the response and the kind of the community aspect of it, people coming in and reacting to it and commenting on it and furthering the message or sharing it with a wider group and so on. So that's for us what the kind of missing link is for what you just mentioned, that kind of that water cooler effect, that kind of positive messages, giving somebody a pat on the back for doing a great job on something, and very visibly as well, right? Which is I think one of the things we've all seen is that peer recognition is obviously hugely important, but it's not just peer recognition. It's public peer recognition, showing people that you appreciate them, and everybody getting a chance to see that it's important for people. And it's very you can do that to a degree on platforms like Slack and Zoom, but generally there's so much noise, or the time frame is so limited, it doesn't reach very far. And that's where we come in, really.
That makes so much sense, and it's hugely motivating. It always strikes me that no matter who we are, no matter where we work in an organization, no matter how senior we are, and even it doesn't matter what age we are, whether we're little kids or adults, when someone says, "Hey, great job," you kind of feel, "Oh, yeah, thanks very much." It's motivating, it makes you feel good, and so important. Joe, just one last question I'd like to ask you before we wrap up. I'm really fascinated with people in very senior leadership position like yourself, co-founder, driving a hugely successful company and on a massive scale of change. What do you do to kind of bring the best version of yourself into the office on a daily basis? You mentioned earlier actually about staying positive most of the time. Like, do you have any kind of tips or hints or tricks you could share with anybody who might be watching this?
I think like one of the things that I would say, and it's something that I don't do often enough myself, Darragh, but I always feel, rejuvenated anytime I do, take the opportunity is actually to just take a step back every so often and look at what you've achieved. And I think sometimes when you're, especially in a startup environment, when you're just moving so fast, it's constant, it's nonstop, and as soon as you reach one milestone, you've already been thinking about the next milestone for months on end beforehand, right? So it doesn't really you kind of lose that sense of accomplishment, even where you take a step back, you celebrate things and things like that. And I think that's massively important, and it's something that I found even if I happen to do it by accident, where maybe I'm one day, like looking back on something, even like for like a reporting context or something like that, right? I'm looking back at a report of something, and I see like a little nugget in there that reminds me of the fact that, we have like massive organizations with huge global presence using our product and using it successfully. You see a reminder of that, and it kind of hits you and you go, whoa, like, we've achieved a great thing here, and we're doing really good work. And I also think, like one of the things that I've been trying to do a little bit more recently is actually having conversations like this, Darragh, right, where you maybe step outside the context of the company itself, right? So like most of my days are packed with tasks and with meetings and with calls and so on that are like very operational, and they're very focused on like the needs of the business at any given moment. But I actually find conversations like this kind of force you to jump out a little bit and actually take an external view on it and start to go, okay, I need to tell my story. I need to talk about like what we're doing in a way that somebody who's not in the business is going to understand and appreciate. And I actually think it serves as almost a reminder that, you're doing okay. You're things are going really well, and you should be proud of that. And I think that's vital, and it's something, as I said, I don't do it enough, right? And it's I wrote a blog post a couple of weeks back. We were up for an award a couple of weeks ago, and I wrote a blog post about awards. And it's funny, Darragh, I even think back to a few years ago when I was like running Subwoofer. I remember being asked to go for an award, and I had this attitude of, nah, look, it's not like, that's not going to move the needle on my business. It's a waste of time. I'm not going for it, right? So, and I didn't go for it. And it's funny, like, we won a number of awards last year in Workvivo. Obviously, we were up for one there a couple of weeks ago as well. And the impact of that I found, again, for doing the exact same thing, which is like almost forcing you to take, a night away where, you're not focused on the business, and you're not thinking about it even subconsciously about what, what's going on and what could be going wrong, and what do we need to do tomorrow and things like that. And just taking an opportunity to just take a step back and enjoy a moment. That's, I think, is actually really important. And I think, people don't do it often enough. So.
Yeah, that's really, and I read that post or that blog that you did as well. I thought it was really insightful too. It is funny, isn't it? You get into a kind of, you're so busy in your day to day, you forget to step back and take a look at what you've achieved.
No, absolutely. I remember we when we won our first like proper enterprise customer, company with 40,000 people around the world, we were rolling it out to them. I remember, when we won that business, it was like, it was an amazing feeling. And then 5 minutes later, it was like, oh, like now we need to make sure that we can service this absolutely monstrous customer, right? So it's and look, I mean, so you move from like celebration to execution mode like straight away, right? So and then once like we got that customer live and everything went well, it was like, again, it's okay, now you move into making sure that they're continue to be successful, and they're they get a good service, and you move on to, okay, we have another customer who's going to be going live next, and it's just it's like, it can be a bit like a wheel, and sometimes it's important to like jump off the wheel and take a break just for a while and enjoy it as well, so.
Absolutely, I totally get that. Joe, I have to say this, I could easily talk to you for another hour, 2 hours maybe. It's been so interesting listening to your insights and learning about your background and kind of where you're going with Workvivo. And I have to say, just, I can feel the excitement. There's a vibe, there's a vibration I can feel when I'm talking to you. Really appreciate you giving me some time today and coming on, and I'm sure so many people that will watch this will get an awful lot from listening to what you've said. So thank you so much, and the best of luck with Workvivo. I do look at you guys online and see where you're going all the time. I think it's a fascinating story, and I can't wait to see what happens over the next 12 months again.
Brilliant. No, thanks for having me on, Darragh. It's been fun, and maybe we'll do it again.
Brilliant.